everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are going to be revisiting a very popular subject, punishment. And we're actually going to be discussing an alternative to punishment known as reinforcement. And this is a great thing to have in your toolbox, whether you are new to DS or if you've been doing it for 5, 10, or 20 years. This is a great thing to know about because today we are going to be discussing not only what reinforcement is, but also about punishment, how effective it is, and the role that it plays in the BDSM community. Now, before we get into talking about reinforcement, I do want to start our conversation by first talking a little bit more about what punishment is, the role it plays in the community, all of that good stuff I just mentioned. So, as a quick reminder, punishment is a tool used in a consensual, negotiated BDSM relationship that is typically a consequence for an unwanted behavior. Usually this comes in the form of some kind of negotiated relationship framework or a contract that involves rules. So for example, somebody might have a rule that they are not allowed to eat cookies without permission. If they then eat a cookie without permission first, then they would be punished perhaps by not being allowed to have cookies with or without permission for a period of time. This is actually an example of a negative punishment. That is when something is removed in order to deter an unwanted behavior. There are also positive punishments where something is added in order to deter an unwanted behavior. The classic over-the-knee spanking is a good example of this, so long as the person doesn't actually enjoy getting spanked. Now, punishments are basically ubiquitous within the BDSM community. It is really hard to have a conversation about power exchange where they aren't brought up in some fashion, be it a conversation about rules or negotiation or enforcement or DS or MS. Punishment will probably be shoehorned in there somewhere. And it can really seem like you can't have a power exchange relationship if you don't also have punishment. There are even entire scenes known as punishment scenes where people will role play out fake being punished for an infraction that doesn't actually exist. There are also maintenance beatings or maintenance spankings, which are a form of a ritualized scene where on a regular basis somebody engages in impact play or spanking, something like that, in order to satisfy and keep centered a masochistic S-type or submissive. And this is sometimes also referred to as a punishment. So there are a lot of things that fall under the broad umbrella of punishment in the world of kink. But for how much we talk about punishments, are they actually effective? Do they actually really do what we want them to do as far as power exchange relationships are concerned? Let's talk a little bit about that. Scientifically speaking, the work of B.F. Skinner through operant conditioning and behaviorism is how we have our current concepts of reward and punishment. But over the last century, behavioral psychologists have made a lot of progress in understanding how punishment, reward, and reinforcement play into behavioral changes. And actually, over a prolonged period of time, punishment can have negative consequences. It can lead to resentment. It can lead to a damage of trust in the relationship. It can lead to basically people not necessarily learning how to conform to rules, but learning how to hide and disguise their bad behavior. Ongoing punishment can lead to fear of your partner and even potentially PTSD. And even when punishment does work to stop behavior in the moment, it's not necessarily effective long term. Oftentimes, after punishment stops or when it's not being used consistently, if somebody is highly motivated to do that unwanted behavior, it will just come back. Now, does this mean that all punishment in BDSM relationships is abuse that leads to PTSD and isn't even effective in the first place? I wouldn't necessarily say so, and I don't really think that's the point here. I think we would agree that for members of the BDSM community, we oftentimes call ourselves freaks and weirdos, and we're probably wired a little bit differently than your standard vanilla person, at least when it comes to punishment. So I don't think it's unreasonable to say that some individuals in some kink relationships respond better to punishment than the general population does. And if you go off the conversations we have in the kink community, it can seem like punishment is the only option when that doesn't work for everyone. It might bring up bad childhood memories. It might not actually deter the behavior we want to deter. You might have somebody that is such a total punishment slut that no matter what you do to try to actually punish them, it just backfires because they like it so much. And that can leave people feeling like they're not meant to do DS, that they're bad subs, that they're bad DOMs, just because they're not able to conform to this community standard that everyone should have punishment as part of their DS. And for those of you out there that are agreeing with this, who are like, I am somebody who really likes DS, but punishment doesn't really work for me, I'm about to blow your mind, because here's the truth. You don't need to have punishment in order to have power exchange. I know that sounds unbelievable, right? But it is actually possible, and that is where reinforcement comes in. Where punishment is all about decreasing an unwanted behavior, reinforcement is about increasing a wanted behavior. Instead of punishing someone when they forget to get permission before they eat a cookie, you would reward them by giving them a bonus cookie when they do remember to ask first. This is actually an example of positive reinforcement. Just like with punishment, there is also negative reinforcement. That is when you take away an unwanted stimulus in response to a wanted behavior. So for example, if you had a time limit on when somebody could eat cookies with permission, say they could only eat cookies, until 10 p.m. at night, if they are able to conform and remember to ask permission first, you might remove that time limit and say you can have cookies whenever you want. The trickiest part of reinforcement is being able to find effective ways to reinforce the behavior you want to see without accidentally also reinforcing behavior you don't want to see. So in that case, if you do want to engage in reinforcement effectively, there are 3 things you need to examine first. 1, examine the rules you have. 2, examine what motivates your partner. And 3, what gets in the way of your partner's obedience? Do they live for praise, but they get discouraged when they're not 100% sure exactly what the rules are? Are they really sexually motivated, but they don't really feel like conforming if their other emotional needs aren't met within the relationship? There are so many possibilities when it comes to this. I think it's worthwhile to sit down and have a conversation with your partner and see if they can tell you what they find motivating, what they think gets in the way of them being able to participate fully in the DS dynamic. And if you absolutely have no idea where to start, I do recommend looking into the 5 Love Languages. It is a classic book and there's lots of quick online quizzes for it you can take to help you get a better sense of what might motivate your partner if you're just not sure where to start. From there, I think it's a good decision to come up with a schedule of how you are going to reinforce certain rules and behaviors and have that as a conversation with your partner. Now, this doesn't mean you just sit down and give a full blueprint of everything that's going to happen in the dynamic with your partner, X rule 1.5 causes Y 2.0 reinforcement except on a Wednesday when blah, blah, blah. You don't need to get that detailed with it, but I do think that having it as a conversation will help you use your partner to make things more effective and also help them feel more invested in what you're building together, which will help with conformance over the long term. And not only do you want to schedule this out a little bit because you want conformance with your partner and you want to make sure they're consenting to everything that happens, but also because as a D-type, this allows you to already have a plan in place in your head, so in the moment, you can reinforce right away without having to wait and sit with yourself and decide on something as it's happening or afterwards. Because when it comes to reinforcement, it is going to be much, much more effective the quicker you can pair the wanted behavior with the reward, with the reinforcement. So if you have a rule where somebody needs to text you after they have 6 glasses of water a day, as soon as they text you that, you need to respond with the good girl, the good boy, whatever it is that's going to be rewarding for your partner. If something is kind of building up long term, if it's a long-term goal, if it's going to be delayed, such as, promising a good scene or going out for a date night, something like that, then you should probably pair that with something that they can get in the moment. Things like collecting coins or a sticker chart, things like that are good so they have something physical they can have in the moment. They can see, I have been rewarded, even when the reward isn't actually happening in the moment, if that makes sense. You can have a little reminder, a little token as a sign of that reinforcement with the reward payout coming at a later date. And also these are good because it helps keep the D-type accountable for following through on those rewards. Because if you are delaying things and saying, okay, that means, next Saturday we're going to go on a date night, you don't have anything to kind of keep you to that. It's a lot harder to remember you made that promise than when your partner has something physical to help remind you of that. Now, encouraging the behavior you want to see with praise and attention and affection, that's easy mode for reinforcement. What is a little bit trickier for reinforcement is controlling the behavior you don't want to see. And that's where most people fall back on punishment. Oh, you're not supposed to bite on your nails, swat on the wrist, whatever, something like that. That's usually where people default to. But it doesn't have to be that way. You can also use reinforcement as a tool for discouraging that unwanted behavior. And the way that we do that is through a tool called incompatible behavior. It's really, really hard to yell when you have an expectation that you're supposed to remain quiet and use an inside voice. And the reason why we do this is rather than discouraging somebody from a behavior we don't want to see, we replace that unwanted behavior with something we do want to see. And then when they do the thing we want to do, we reinforce on that. So rather than punishing somebody for something we don't want to see, we replace that unwanted behavior with something that we do actually want. And then when we see that they are doing the thing we want, then we reward them for that. And so they're just more motivated to do the thing we want them to do versus the thing we don't want them to do, right? Okay, it just naturally replaces itself. And then that wanted behavior will over time take the place of that unwanted behavior instead. Do they like to roll their eyes? Maybe you have a rule where they are supposed to keep their eyes downcast instead. Do they really like to swear? Maybe you have a rule then where instead of swearing, they are expected to say other words instead of the swear words. You also want to consider what purpose that unwanted behavior has. Is it because they need sensory input? Is it because they really want an object like a phone or a laptop? Is it because they're looking for attention? Is it because they're trying to escape doing something else? This is going to be most effective when you can identify why it is they want to do the behavior you don't want to see and replace that with something that's equally motivating. So for example, you might have a little that loves to scream and cry whenever they want daddy's attention. Rather than rewarding them with attention when they are in the middle of that meltdown to try and calm them down, what you would do instead is you would teach them another way that they can request that attention they want in a respectful manner, and then when they do the request in the way that you want, that's when you give them the attention instead. So you're reinforcing that behavior you do want to see rather than the tantrum. And that actually brings me to the last point that I want to make when it comes to talking about reinforcement, and that is bribery and bargaining. Now, I actually found this really great little infographic that is meant for teachers, but if you replace child or student with whatever your S-type's label is, it definitely makes a lot of sense. And basically the difference between doing something like this, where you are reinforcing behavior, versus bargaining or bribery, is how you approach it and who is in control in the moment. Are you begging your submissive to stop doing something by whatever means you think will work in the moment? For example, please honey, if you just stop poking me, I promise we will get ice cream later. Versus something that's a little bit more disciplined and the dominant is in authority in that moment. Honey, if you want to have ice cream, you need to ask me respectfully first. Does that make sense? Can you guys kind of see where the difference is? Now, especially if you have a bratty partner, this can take some time to work through. So hopefully you'll take a moment and kind of evaluate how you are doing things in the moment. But again, it goes back to that scheduling I talked about earlier. If you already have an idea in your head of how you want to reinforce certain behaviors, then it's going to be a lot easier to stay away from that temptation to bribe and bargain with your partner. And that's basically everything I wanted to share today about reinforcement. Reinforcement is a really underutilized tool when it comes to power exchange dynamics. So hopefully if you're in a DS relationship, if you have been struggling with punishments, this helped you get some good ideas of how you can approach things for yourself. Again, there are so many different ways to reinforce and establish BDSM dynamics, so many different ways that people are motivated in their DS. So definitely have conversations with your partners, see what motivates them, see what gets in the way of them being able to obey the way that you both want to be able to obey in your relationship. And yeah, that's basically all I have to say. Any other comments or questions, you can leave them down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this, if you want to see more from me, you can subscribe. I make videos twice a week about all sorts of kink and BDSM related topics. And finally, if you really enjoyed this, if you want to support my work, the best way you can do that is through Patreon. That's what makes all of this possible. If you already support me over there, thank you so, so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you guys next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.